we're going to trim the plate that we threw earlier. And just like any other trimming, I'm going to hold on to this plate and kind of feel where my thickness is, how much I have to work with. Most clay is almost always going to be on this area. And you need to keep in mind where you have that lip between your floor and your side. If it's a really harsh angle, it's very easy to trim through your piece because your foot ring is going to be very similar in position. So make sure you know where that is and you're thinking about that as you make your foot ring. So I'm going to set that down on the wheel head and start to center it. Okay, so where's my mark? Mark starts there and ends there, so I need to push it over a bit. Let's try again. Alright, we're making contact all the way around, which is good. We're going to take our wads of clay, and with the plate, I don't want to apply pressure to the center, so I'm going to do 2 at once, opposite each other, so don't push it off center, and stick those down to the wheel head. Not applying a lot of pressure to the rim of the plate, but to the wheel head. Stick those down. So probably the last time I use these particular wads, they're getting dry. And then I'm going to start my trimming. I'm going to get this edge evened out. And I know that my bottom isn't super consistently smooth, especially not so much a big deal in the center, but where my foot ring's going to be, I want to make sure this time I'm going to kind of scrape away. And what I want to do is hold my rib at a consistent height and let it scrape at the highest point. You can do the same thing with your trim tool. This is a good use for this big trim tool. Hold it steady at a steady height, slowly lower it until it touches somewhere. Just hold your tool steady, and it's only contacting a certain area. And as I slowly lower in, it's going to contact more and more to start leveling that out. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it is important to level out that surface. Alright, so we're going to use our pin tool and kind of mark where we think we want our foot ring to be. Gonna have to say about there probably. And I'm going to start removing the excess clay. Again, always considering your thickness, remembering what you felt when you were holding it, remembering where that lip between the side of your plate and the bottom of your plate is, so that you don't end up with a really thin spot there, and just trim right through it. Again, just like any other trimming, you're going to decide what sort of shape you want on your foot. If there's a curve, if there's a straight, what kind of curve, is there an angle to it? Lots of questions that you can answer, just dependent on what you think the aesthetics of the plate you're making are. And I know I don't have a ton. It's definitely enough to trim and enough to glaze, but I can't go crazy on taking away clay out of the center of this because I didn't leave enough for a giant hunkin' foot. So, and again, like many other things, don't try to take away it all at once. Take away as much as you can. Stop, clear out your tool. When you're doing the insides of things, sometimes those ribbons like to wrap themselves up in your tool, and then you have to clean it out. Notice my hand is always making, my both hands are always making contact with the tool. You can choose to go out to in as well. I prefer the other direction because there's less, the ribbons don't get in the way as much when you go in to out. But you always want to stay on this one side of the wheel. Don't want to cross over the center because then your tool is getting pulled into you instead of the clay getting pulled through the tool. When I feel pretty good about how much I've trimmed off, I kind of remember the thickness. Yeah, I can kind of hear that difference there. I'm pretty happy with that. I want to recompress what I've done here. So I'm going to use my wooden rib and compress any places that I have. I can also at this point, if I can feel some inconsistencies in the surface of this foot ring, I could take this opportunity to try to fix some of those, and I'll show you that in just a minute. I'm going to compress the center of this. Recompression is so important when we trim. So important, especially with a plate like this, how wide it is. We've just opened up such an expanse of clay that hasn't been compressed well that we really need to take our time and compress that clay again. Same thing with the foot ring, but again, I feel like I've got a little bit of cutouts in there. So what I'm going to do is take my pin tool and try to cut away from the side. Just cut a little bit of that thickness off, holding my pin tool steady. There we go. So now it cut away the areas that were higher, and it's much more level now. Alright, so I've got my foot trimmed, I've got the center compressed. These wads of clay are no longer wet enough to use again, so I'm going to get rid of them, get new ones for the next piece. And the tricky part with picking up plates is getting them off the wheel without bending them. If you've got a big enough foot, you can grab it that way. But I'm going to just be gentle, flip it over, kind of feel if any of my pressure went through. It looks okay. I kind of like run my finger along this to see if anything feels like it's pushed out. You can just do a gentle press in the very center to bring it back in if you feel anything. And then we need to let this dry, and that's another hard part about plates, is make sure you flip them as they're drying. Maybe put a cloth over them, leave them this way one day, put them between a bat, turn it over, take the top bat off, let it dry the other way the next day so that it's getting air to both sides. And then when it's bone dry, you can put it on the shelf to be fired.